Everyone in the village thought Ikemba was the most handsome man they have ever seen. His skin was smooth like fresh palm wine. His eyes sparkled like the morning sun on the river. And his voice was as deep as rich as the drums during a festival. All the girls wanted to be with him, and all the men wanted to be like him. But there was something strange about Ikemba that no one understood. No one knew where he came from. He didn't seem to have a family, and he never spoke about his past. It was as if he had appeared in the village one day, already a grown man, and no one had questioned it. They were all too captivated by his looks. I remember the first time I saw him. I was fetching water at the river when Ikemba passed. All the other girls giggled and whispered to each other, hoping he would notice them. But Ikemba never looked their way. He always seemed distant, like his mind was far away, thinking of something no one could understand. And then Urima came. Urima was different from other girls. She was beautiful, with eyes that shone like stars and hair that fell like a waterfall down her back. But she didn't giggle and blush like the other girls when Ikemba passed by. She looked at him with curiosity, almost like she could see something no one else could. One evening, I overheard Urima talking to her grandmother. She said, "There's something strange about Ikemba. I feel it in my bones. He is not like us." Her grandmother nodded slowly, her wrinkled face serious. "You are right, child. Ikemba is not who he seems." I shivered when I heard that. What could she mean? Could there be something wrong with Ikemba? Days passed and Urima became more and more interested in Ikemba. She started asking questions. Not the usual questions like, what does Ikemba like? Or, where does he live? She asked things like, why does Ikemba never age? Why does he never talk about his family? The other girls in the village grew jealous. They didn't like how Urima was always around Ikemba. They spread rumors that Urima was only trying to steal him from them. But Urima didn't care. She was determined to uncover the truth about him. One night, Urima followed Ikemba into the forest. I didn't know what she saw that night. But when she came back, she was different. She was quiet, her face pale, her hands trembling. She didn't speak to anyone for days. Finally, when I couldn't start it anymore, I went to see her. "Urima, what happened? What did you see?" Urima looked at me with haunted eyes. "Ikemba, he's not who we think he is." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "He's not a man," she whispered. "He's something else, something old, something that have lived for many, many years. He refuses to die." I stared at her in disbelief. "What are you saying? That's not possible." Urima shook her head. "I saw it with my own eyes. Ikemba is ancient. He has been living for centuries, moving from villages to villages, and every time he makes people forget where he came from. He hides who he really is." "But why?" I asked, my voice trembling. Why would he do that? Urima's face darkened. Because he's afraid. Afraid of dying. Afraid of what will happen when his time finally comes. I felt a chill run down my backbone. I didn't want to believe it, but the look in Urima's eyes told me she was telling the truth. Ikemba, the most handsome man in the village, was not a man at all. He was something far more trembling, terrifying. And now that Urima knew his secret, I couldn't help but wonder, what would Ikemba do to keep it hidden? Urima began to avoid Ikemba after that night, but it was clear he knew she had discovered his secret. I could see it in the way he looked at her. His eyes no longer soft and charming, but cold like a hunter watching his target. One day, Ikemba approached Urima in the marketplace. "Why are you avoiding me, Urima?" he asked. His voice soft as ever, but there was something dangerous lurking beneath it. Urima didn't answer. She kept her head down, pretending to be busy with the vegetables she was picking through. But I could see her hands shaking. Ikemba stepped closer, too close. "You have learned something you shouldn't have," he whispered. His voice low and threatening, "and now you wish you hadn't." Before Urima could respond, Ikemba disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing there, pale and trembling. I knew then that things were going to get worse. Ikemba wasn't going to let her go easily. As the days passed, strange things started happening. People in the village began to forget things, little things at first, like where they had put their shoes or what they have eaten for breakfast. But then it got worse. They started forgetting entire conversation, whole days even. It was like Ikemba was erasing their memories, trying to make them forget about him, about his secret. But no matter how much he tried, Urima didn't forget. She held onto the truth like a lifeline, even as everyone around her seemed to slip into a strange mist. I began to worry for Urima. She was becoming more isolated, and I knew Ikemba wouldn't stop until he had silenced her for good. But Urima was determined. She refused to back down, even though I could see the fear in her eyes. One night, Urima came to me, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "I need your help," she said. "We have to stop Ikemba." "But how?" I asked, my heart racing. "He's too powerful. What can we do?" Urima took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I don't know yet, but I'm not going to let him get away with this. We have to find a way to stop him before it's too late." And so, we began our dangerous journey to uncover the truth about Ikemba. Knowing that every step we took brought us closer to a terrifying secret that could destroy us all. The days grew darker after that. Urima and I kept our distance from Ikemba, but it was clear he knew we were working against him. Every time I saw him, his eyes seemed colder, his smile sharper. He didn't have to say a word, but I could feel the threat hanging in the air between us. Urima had been spending her night searching for answers. She talked to the elders, asked them old stories about men who lived for centuries, about causes that could keep people alive long after they should have been gone. Most of the elders shook their heads, saying they didn't know of such things. But one old woman, Mama Amara, told us a story that chilled us to the bone. Mama Amara's voice was thin and rapturous as she spoke. "There is a legend," she said, "of a man who cheated death. He was once a great warrior, but he feared his afterlife. He made a deal with a dark spirit, begging for eternal life. The spirit granted his wish but cursed him. The man could live forever, but he would never truly belong anywhere. He would wander from village to village, watching as everyone around him grew old and died. And worst of all, he would never know peace." I felt a shiver run down my backbone. Do you think this is what happened to Ikemba? Mama Mara nodded slowly. It could be. But if it is, then the curse can only be broken one way. How? Urima asked, leaning forward, her eyes filled with determination. The curse can only be broken if someone uncovers his secret and is willing to face him. If that person is brave enough to confront the man, he would lose his immortality. But she paused, her eyes darkened. The man will not give up his life willingly. He will fight to protect his secret, and he will destroy anyone stands in his way. Urima and I exchanged a look. We knew what this meant. We wanted to stop Ikemba. Urima would have confronted him directly, and there was no telling what Ikemba might do if he felt threatened. As we left Mama Mara's house that night, the weight of what we had heard do settle heavily on our shoulders. Urima was silent, but I could see the fear in her eyes still. She was determined. She wouldn't let Ikemba's curse continue to harm our village. The next morning, Urima called a meeting with the village chief, explaining everything we had learned. The chief was an old man, wise and curious. At first, he didn't believe us. Ikemba had been in the village for years, and no one had ever suspected anything strange about him. But Urima told him about the strange forgetfulness spreading among the villagers. The chief grew quiet. "I have noticed the forgetfulness too," he admitted. "It is as if we are all losing pieces of ourselves." Urima's voice was steady as she replied, "It is Ikemba. She is trying to make us forget, so no one will remember his secret." The chief frowned. "But if what you say is true, then confronting Ikemba could be dangerous for you, for all of us." "I know," Urima said, her face set with determination. "But we have to try. If we do nothing, Ikemba will continue to live among us, and the village will suffer." The chief signed, looking old and tired. "Very well," he said. "We will confront him, but we must be careful. Ikemba is not just a man. He is something far more dangerous." The plan was simple, but it filled me with dread. That night, as the village gathered around the fire, Urima would confront Ikemba in front of everyone. If Mama Ma's story was true, Ikemba wouldn't be able to hide his secret any longer. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the village, I could feel the tension in the air. The villagers whispered nervously, unaware of what about to happen. Urima stood tall. Urima stood tall, her face calm, but her eyes filled with fire. I stood by her side, my heart pounding in my chest. Ikemba arrived at the gathering like he always did, handsome, charming, and unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. He smiled at the villagers, his perfect teeth shining in the firelight. But when his eyes landed on Urima, his smile paused. Urima stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Ikemba, we know your secret. The crowd fell silent. Ikemba's eye narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a sparkle of fear in them. Urima continued, her voice cutting through the quiet. You are not like us. You have lived for centuries, moving from village to village, hiding who you really are. But now we know the truth. Ikemba's face darkened, his charming smile replaced by a cold, hard look. You don't know what you are talking about, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But Urima didn't back down. You made a deal with a dark spirit. You asked for eternal life, but you were cursed. You can't die, but you will never know peace. The villagers pounded, and I could see the fear spreading among them. Ikemba's eye flashed with anger. You foolish girl, he hissed. You don't understand what you are dealing with. And then something changed. Ikemba's face twisted, his handsome features turning into something darker, more terrifying. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and the air around him seemed to glow colder. The crowd retreated in horror, but Urima stood her ground. Your time is up, Ikemba. The course ends tonight. Ikemba let out a boom of fury, and before anyone could react, he shot at Urima. His hands extended, ready to silence her once and for all. Ikemba's movement was fast, too fast for anyone to see clearly, but Urima was ready. Just as his hands reached for her, she pulled something from her punch, a small charm Mama Amara had given her. It was old and warm, a simple thing made from twine and a few bones. But Mama Amara had told us it carries the power of the ancestors. Ikemba froze as the charm caught the firelight. His eyes widened in fear, something I had never seen in him before. He stumbled back, his body trembling, his eyes deformed in pain. What have you done? Ikemba panted, his voice harsh, no longer the smooth, gentle tone that had charmed the village for so long. His handsome face twisted in agony as the charm's power washed over him. You can't run from your fate anymore, Urima said, her voice steady but full of the weight of the moment. Your time has come. Ikemba grabbed his chest, his breath coming in short. Even breath, he dropped to his knee, his once smooth skin now wrinkled, sagging like the skin of an ancient sagging like a skin of an ancient elder. The crowd stared in shock, their mouths open in disbelief. The transformation was horrifying. The man we had known as Ikemba was coming apart before our eyes. His hair turned grey, his muscles shrink, and his smooth skin became rough and cracked like old clay. In mere moments, the most handsome man in the village had become something old, fragile, and terrifying. I, I won't let it end like this, Ikemba grumbled, struggling to raise his body, trembling with the effort. But Urima stood firm, her eyes locked on his. The ancestor has spoken. Your time is this. In this world is over. Ikemba let out a deep scream, a sound that chilled me to the bone. His body twisted, and for a moment it seemed like he might fight through the curse, might somehow stick to life. But then, just as suddenly, the fight left him. He collapsed onto the ground, his breathing shallow, his body weak and broken. The villagers, who had been watching in shocked silence, began to murmur. Some panted in horror, others wept, finally understanding the depth of Ikemba's deception. Urima knelt beside him, her voice soft but firm. You have lived long enough, Ikemba. It's time to let go. For a moment, Ikemba's eyes shined with something regret, perhaps a sadness. Then, with a final shaking breath, his eyes closed and he was still. Silence fell over the village as we stared at what remained of Ikemba, the ancient man who had refused to die, the handsome, charming stranger who had bewitched us all was gone, leaving only a fragile, faded figure behind. I turned to Rima, who was still kneeling beside Ikemba's body, her face pale but calm. Is it over? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Urima looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness I had never seen before. Yes, she said quietly, it's over. The villagers slowly gathered around, some still too shocked to speak, others murmuring prayers to their ancestors. I could see the fear and confusion in their eyes, but also a sense of relief. Ikemba's spell over the village had finally been broken. For a moment, we all stood there, unsure of what to do, but then the village chief stepped forward, his old worn face serious as he looked down at Ikemba's body. We will give him a burial, he said softly. But we will also remember this day. Let it be a lesson to all of us that no man, no matter how powerful, can escape the judgment of the ancestors. The crowd nodded in agreement and slowly they began to scatter, returning to their homes, their minds heavy with the events of the night. As Urima and I stood together in the fading light of the fire, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and something else, something deeper. Urima, I said, my voice trembling, how do you know you could defeat him? Urima looked at me, her face tired but determined. I didn't, she admitted, but I knew we had to try. I couldn't let him continue like this, living forever while the rest of us suffer. I nodded, understanding now what she meant. Ikemba had been afraid of death, but in the end, it was that fear that had doomed him. And as I looked at Urima, I realized just how brave she had been to face him, to confront the truth, even when it terrified her. We walked back to the village in silence, the weight of the night events heavy on our shoulders. The sky was dark and the stars shone brightly overhead, like the eyes of the ancestors watching us. As we reached the village, Urima stopped and turned to me. "This isn't over," she said softly, her eyes distant, as if she were saying something far away. "There are more like Ikemba out there, hiding in the shadows. And now that we have uncovered one, the others will be watching." I felt the chill run down my backbone at her words. More like Ikemba? Could there really be others out there? Men and women who had cheated dead and were living among us, hidden behind their beautiful faces and charming smiles? Urima's expression was serious as she met my gaze. "We have to be ready," she said, "because one day we might have to face them too." And as we stood there in the darkness, I knew that our journey was far from over. Ikemba was gone, but the secret he had kept, the dark truth he had hidden, were only just beginning to unravel. The village was never the same again.